new world where digital is taking over?
Well, I think this will warrant, and Canada Post is owned by Canadians. And I think looking at the future of Canada Post, it's important that we review its mandate with an idea of what Canada Post will look like in 10, 15, 20 years. How can it, better adapt and offer services that make sense to Canadians as the world changes? And I'll be looking forward to hear from Canadians, hear from hopefully this committee at some point as well, on what this can look like. But given the financial situation, given the losses in Q2, given the $10 million a day, and I hear now it's even more than that, to me it was important, and to the government it was important to move quickly, decisively, with the changes we've announced, to put the corporation on a sustainable So we've had extensive communications with Canada Post Chief Financial Officer, and this is on a daily basis currently. That's what they're losing. In fact, it's probably more at this point, and this is largely due to the labor unrest that we've seen in the last 20 months. Truth be told, because just if you look at when flyers and commercial mails not sent, that impacts the bottom line. It's $1 billion in revenue for Canada Post. Okay. So all this taken together accounts for this very high number of 10 million, but I'm hearing it's way higher right now, though the 10 million has been duly verified. I can't speak to the numbers I've heard recently, so I won't go there, but I think it speaks to the importance for the union and management to reach a deal, negotiated deal, the sooner the better.
Thank you. You also mentioned the recent study that this committee undertook. And as you may be aware, while Conservatives agreed with the recommendations that were submitted in that report, we also submitted a supplementary report, specifically which noted the testimony of Canada Post CEO, who noted that the federal government failed to approve their strategic plan from 2019 to the date of his testimony. And so I'm wondering if you would advise us, what were the political reasons behind vetoing the independent strategic plan submitted by Canada Post over the last 5 years?
I can only speak for my tenure as minister. I've approved their latest corporate plan, and it's my intention that corporate plans be approved and submitted and available for review by parliamentarians on a yearly basis as we go forward, because I think it's important for Canadians to see how the transformation is going.
Right. Okay. Were you made aware that their plans had not been approved from 2019 to 2024?
I defer to the Deputy Minister on this one.
Yeah, I think that those corporate plans have been reviewed and looked at from the Treasury Board, who provides an annual overview of that. And I think some of the considerations were around how best to manage the fiscal situation and some of the issues that were faced with the labor unrest.
And do you think you did that? Do you think you did that, given where Canada Post is today, by not approving their strategic plan over the last 5 years? I'm just going to leave that question there. Minister, you've talked about Canada Post now in a process of right-sizing itself. How many additional jobs do you expect will be lost under this right-sizing, and over what timeline?
That's a question best asked to Canada Post, who's in charge of the operations. I'm not. However, I think even as the government is going through a comprehensive expenditure review where we're looking at efficiencies across government, I think it's only fair to expect the same thing from Canada Post, and even more so given that they're losing so much money. So I'm looking forward to see their plan. It's forthcoming. I think they have about 20 days left to bring that plan back. But on the specific numbers you're asking, it's best asked to the corporation in charge of the daily operations of Canada Post.
So at no time while you were preparing to make these announcements that happened on September 25th, you took into consideration the impact on the workforce that your announcements would have?
Well, that's not correct. Of course, it's something, when you look at the organization, Canada Post has a very big structure that is designed to deliver volume that are not existent today. So I think it's only fair to ask the organization to right-size itself given the nature of letter mail today.
So you announce a plan and then tell them to right-size themselves without knowing exactly what the cost to the workforce might be?
Brief answer, please.
Well, on that note, I'm not in charge of the daily operations of Canada Post. Management is, so I think that's a question best asked for management. But when you have a Crown Corporation that's losing $10 million a day, I think it's only fair, and I'm sure you would agree, MP Block, to ask them to find the efficiencies and right-size themselves.
Thanks. Mr. Gasparo, please.
Yet.
So in regards to right-sizing, The average household now receives 2 letters per week. Dramatic decrease from 5 years ago. And there's a degrading of demand for letter services to individual households. However, parcel delivery obviously is, there is significant demand. Some of the traditional media companies, for example, have picked up a lot of the deliveries from Amazon and other outlets. So can you talk a little bit about the strategy around parcel delivery and where how critical that is for Canada Post?
That's a good question. Thank you very much. And I think it's very important for Canada Post to find ways to be competitive. And I think it's highlighted in the Kaplan report that in order for Canada Post to be competitive, it needs to find ways to be more flexible, more agile. And a lot of this has to do with management and the union finding ways to work together much more efficiently than they've done in the past. I think the relationship between labor and management, I'm hoping for a renewal of that relationship given the financial circumstances and that they'll both work together to, and I've met, me and my team have met extensively with the union. I've met with management as well, and I can tell that they both have, at heart, the future of Canada Post. They both want to find a viable path for the future of Canada Post, and I'm hoping that they'll find ways in their collective agreement to make it possible for Canada Post to find a financially viable future.
No further questions, Chair.
Madame Gaudreau, please, to finish off. Then we'll suspend quickly to allow our new witnesses to join us. Go ahead, Madame.
I'm going to come back to parcels because I'm thinking about communities. I visited the Magdalen Islands, and following September 25th, people said I need prescriptions, and it's Canada Post that is responsible for the delivery, so regardless of where it is geographically. And these people are so worried. They're saying that there's so much competition. Canada Post will take care of letters, but they'll drop parcels. What reassures me is that we're talking about essential services, that you won't prevent the safety and security for so many letters and parcels, but at what price? How much are you prepared to put into this? How big a deficit, knowing that it's an essential service? Well, I'd say the least possible, because Canada Post's mission in the end is to offer the services that they offer in a financially viable manner. Now, reality dictates that it's been impossible the last few years for them to do so. That's why the government provided $1 billion and will give more, but the least possible as far as I'm concerned. Canada Post has to find a way to operate, amongst others, by eliminating the constraints that they have. They need to be more efficient and to continue pursuing its essential mission. And thank you for raising the point. For Quebecers are very attached to Canada Post, as are all Canadians, and especially in the remote regions like the Magdalen Islands, as you mentioned. So having said all that, people are aware that bailing out Canada Post year after year, and I think this answers Mr. Boulris, in part this would come at a cost to other services that Canadians depend on. So I think that that is how Canada Post really has a path that needs to follow, and this transformation is what we are asking of them. I have many questions, Mr. Chairman, but what now I can see is that there are many components. I know there are 20 days left, but in my opinion, the CEO absolutely has to come and speak to us about this request that's been put forward here. We're somewhat reassured, but we're still unsure about many elements, including this service. If I may, the conditions are clear. They have to maintain service to rural and remote communities. And given your interest and your defense of the regions, I'd really like to speak with you. I'd say in English. I don't have the French translation.
Et je veux m'assurer que ça soit le cas.
And I'll ensure that that's the case. That's what I hope. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Minister, thanks for joining us again. Colleagues will suspend for a couple moments to bring in our new witnesses. Thanks for your patience. We have witnesses today, Mr. Ryder and Mr. Lee. I understand you both have opening statements. Why don't we start with yourself, Mr. Lee, as you're virtual, and then we'll go to Mr. Ryder. 5 minutes each, please, if I'll ask you to watch your clocks. Thanks.
I'll try. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, my disclosures to the honorable members. Number one, I don't belong to or donate money to any political party or allow any lawn signs. Secondly, I completed my 850-page PhD thesis in 1989 on Canada Post, using every annual report of the Post Office Department and Hansard from 1820 to 1981, as well as public archives on Wellington Street. Three, I completed my 2015 MLI study exclusively based on every annual report of Canada Post from 2000 to 2015, and the annual CRTC media monitoring stats reports and the annual Payments Canada stats reports. Fourth, I completed the 2024 study for the Canada Post at the tipping point using the same government sources and audits, but updated to 2024. Finally, my final disclosure, for 35 years, I've taught the strategy capstone course, researching competitiveness of firms and industries in Canada and the United States. Before summarizing my empirical research over the past 25 years, I want to briefly mention the single most important analysis I've ever read concerning communications technology and policy, because it goes to the very core of all the issues you're discussing. In 1995, MIT engineering prof Nicholas Negroponte, co-founder of Wired magazine and the very famous Media Lab, wrote Being Digital. He argued that all of existence is composed either of atoms or electrons. Human bodies, mine, yours, indeed any physical object, including trucks and planes and trains, are made of atoms which have mass and weight. And Einstein's laws of relativity limit the speed at which atoms can travel, i.e., very slowly. By contrast, any information that is digitized is comprised of electrons which have no mass and no weight. This means that electrons travel at the speed of electricity, which is almost the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. From these principles of physics, Negroponte concluded that electrons everywhere in the world will always trump atoms in the realm of communications. From this, Negroponte predicted astonishingly in 1995 the complete digital deconstruction of every Western society over the next third of a century, of everything informational, from post offices to newspapers to broadcasting to publishing to education to entertainment to banking to government to payment systems to healthcare. Whew. And he was absolutely correct before any other person in the world. My 2015 study of the audited annual reports of CPC revealed that the Negroponte trend started in Canada in 2006, a steep decline of letters every year without exception. My 2024 report brought the numbers up to date, showing the very same report with no exception, declines every year. In the core business, you've already heard the numbers, decline from 5.5 billion to 2 billion pieces. However, some do not understand that these numbers continue to collapse going forward. Indeed, letter mail will mostly, I predict, disappear within 10 years, as the remaining small businesses that still use mail will digitize their value chains due to the Negropontean logic. And those few remaining elderly that still write letters will sadly die. The second core business of parcels is very different because e-commerce increases by 9% a year. Yet during and after the pandemic, CPC lost over half its market share in parcels due to the entry of the gigs. In my 2024 report, I provided estimates of average operating costs for truck, driver, and fuel. About $65 an hour for CPC, $45 an hour for the big private contractors, couriers, and about $25 an hour for the gigs. Now you can understand why CPC is collapsing in parcels. As the CEO and CFO stated in 2024, the current architecture is not sustainable with this decline. As I've stated for the last 5 years, long before Kaplan did, CPC was and is insolvent, unable to pay its bills as they become due. This is why the government provided a $1 billion bailout and will have to again and again and again, bigger and bigger and bigger until it's restructured. There are critics, probably in this room, who state this doesn't matter as it's an essential service. I argue this is an error that assumes precisely what is being debated because one, CPC is not a going concern. It exists only because the government's saving it by a bailout. Two, the alleged essential services provided are not essential, supported by the radical decline in usage by more and more people every year who use the post office less and less. If it was essential, we wouldn't stop using the post office. Three, it's argued that CPC doesn't have to make a profit. It's no different than national defense. This is a false analogy because defense is a pure public good that benefits everyone and it's not divisible, whereas Canada Post delivers a private good that is divisible in discrete units. We call them letters with stamps. In conclusion, this is not an argument to shut down or privatize the post office. However, it must be radically restructured to a much smaller entity, maybe 15,000, maybe 20,000. I don't have the internal data from Canada Post that services those citizens most in need, the approximately 15% of Canadians. StatsCan estimates it precisely at 5.9 million Canadians in the rural and remote communities where there are no private alternatives. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Lee. Mr. Ryder, over to you, sir. Welcome to OGO.
Thank you. And I thought this committee was tough. Look at what Ian just told you there. My God, he scares you to death, doesn't he? I'd like to make 4 points, if I can, in my 5 minutes. And much of this you've already heard, and I apologize because I didn't know what other thirds you were going to hear. First, Canada Post is a very sick company. If I was teaching this at the university, I would describe it as being in a death spiral. This is what we found with the Hudson's Bay Company, for instance. It's a crown corporation backed by the Canadian government, and because no postal service in the world has failed in the last few years, then I don't think it's necessarily going to be dead in 6 or 12 months, but clearly action, strong action is needed now, sooner rather than later, and I said in my little note, think months, not years in terms of change. Secondly, I'm fine with the changes being proposed by the federal government and the minister who sat here just a few moments ago. Moving letter delivery to community mailboxes is fine. I've had a community mailbox for 3 decades. I absolutely love it. I actually view it as a service enhancement. I go away. I don't worry about a poacher going through my mailboxes when I am not there. Same thing with getting rid of Canada Post-owned post offices, probably in favor of franchises. I haven't been in a post office, again, for decades. I visit a Shoppers Drug Mart that has a Canada Post kiosk inside. It's got longer service hours and it operates 7 days a week. That's an enhancement to the service that I used to get from Canada Post's own post office. And slow delivery of mail from 4 days to 7 days, you know, I don't think most people will notice that. But I want to emphasize that while these are necessary changes, they are not sufficient. Ms. Block pointed out the math, some of the math problems. I'll just point out another one. If Canada Post is losing $1.5 billion this year, and you do these 3 things, you save $500 million. Step in the right direction, but you're still losing $1 billion. We've got to go beyond that, which gets me to point 3. Canada Post has to also generate more revenue. You can't cut your way, you can't shrink your way to success. You've got to find a way to generate more revenue. Now, the only bright spot is parcel mail. Parcel mail is where they've lost the biggest volume, but they also have a couple of competitive advantages. Number one is they serve every community in Canada. The private couriers have chosen to cherry pick. They visit suburban areas and urban areas, but if you're in northern BC, if you're the Magdalen Islands, too bad FedEx can't get there. In fact, oddly, the private people subcontract to Canada Post at that point for the delivery. But how do you get back to a higher market share? So people sitting at this table, that means that a Crown corporation is going to have to try to take back market share from private companies. And that raises lots of interesting philosophical issues. I'm not keen on a postal bank or on postal insurance. I'm surprised Ian didn't mention this in his comments. We used to have a Canadian postal bank, and it shut a little over 60 years ago. If Canada Post were to get into the banking business, what competitive advantage would it have? It doesn't know the first thing about banking. And if you start a bank today, for it to generate any kind of significant profit, you'd be talking years and years and years, and you do not have years and years and years. About the only bright spot I could suggest is looking at other delivery partnerships. Canada Post has this army of workers out there who are trained at delivery. Are there other people who might need deliveries that they can go to? Finally, if we're going to win back customers, if Canada Post is going to win back customers, it has to have stability. And therefore, I would agree with what the minister said around having a collective agreement. We also need a collective agreement that's not for 6 months or 8 months or a year. We need a 3-year, 4-year collective agreement so that we can get some harmony out there as it goes. But I'll be honest with you, as I sit here today, I don't know how you achieve that. I suspect if I was a member of the union, I would want to sign a collective agreement that gave me job guarantees. Bless your heart, Ian, for suggesting I'm not going to go quite as big a number as you, but I think we're looking at least 10,000 employees who need to be either encouraged to retire or perhaps given severances to go. No union is going to want to agree to that as you go forward. They want to keep every job that they've got today. So I don't quite know how you're going to find that labor harmony that is so necessary. But if you can get that harmony and then you free up Canada Post to tackle some of these tough issues, I think there is a future for it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryder. We'll start with Mrs. Block, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank both of our witnesses for joining us today. This is much more interesting than I have to admit I thought it would be. I've really appreciated your testimony here, and it's caused me to wonder why both you, Mr. Ryder, and you, Mr. Lee, can, I guess, speculate on the number of jobs that could be lost. And we heard from our minister earlier that he didn't give that a thought because it's not his job. So I think that's an interesting takeaway for me. I'm going to direct my first questions to Mr. Lee. You have long commented on the future of Canada Post, the postal services here in Canada, and obviously a long-standing interest in that corporation. would you comment, or would you say that you believe the government has been aware of the deteriorating state of the Postal Service for some time, as you have indicated?
Yes, and I realize my answer is going to sound self-serving, so I'm just disclosing that right away. I was asked to testify in 2016 before the Blue Ribbon panel set up by then newly elected Trudeau government. And they appointed a Blue Ribbon panel. It's been well published. Everybody knows that panel. And I went before it, and I had just published the year before my 2015 Macdonald-Laurier Institute report with all the data from the of the losses and the declines and so forth. And I had in there the radical surgery that I recommended, and which was franchising all post offices, ending 5-day-a-week delivery, ending the home delivery to the 25% of Canadians who are privileged to get home delivery. And full disclosure, before anyone attacks me, yes, I'm one of those people. I shouldn't be getting home delivery to my door, but I do, although there's no letters coming anyway, so it doesn't matter. But to your question, I put some very precise recommendations in that report. I was there for probably 3 hours, I think, testifying, and they rejected the advice, the concrete, very concrete recommendations, and then I disclosed them in the media in questions. And at the time, the Prime Minister, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm absolutely certain the Prime Minister and Dominique LeBlanc, the minister responsible for, rejected it, and did CUPW, and did the management of Canada Post. So I'm not trying to point the finger at one person or one. Everybody said, no. And their basic argument, I think, was this very quickly. Yes, the letters are declining very precipitously, but it's come to an end. It's going to plateau, and the problem is going to be okay because we're going to stabilize at a lower than 5.5 billion letters, but it's not going to be that bad. And I said, my response was, there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the decline has plateaued. Any one of you can look at the decline, and every year it goes down by 6 to 8 to 9% in the pieces delivered of letter mail. And it's not because something I'm doing, it's what Negroponte pointed out, that the economics of digitization just overwhelm the physical distribution of letters and mail.
Thank you very much. So we Blue Ribbon panel in 2016. 2017, the task force suggested changes. The committee did a report, years of posting losses, and still the government didn't approve the strategic plans being put forward by Canada Post for 5 years. Would either of you like to comment on that?
Maybe put a different spin than Ian on this.
Okay.
I think 10 years ago when Ian testified, you had a fairly healthy Canada Post, and therefore we find the need for change is harder to get through when things look fairly healthy. But it was 5 years ago, around 2020, that you had the first significant signs that something wasn't right at Canada Post. Unfortunately, that was also when the country was facing COVID. And I think if I was in government, I'm not, but if I was in government, which challenge do I face first, a pandemic or the situation at Canada Post? Probably people prioritize pandemic. But I would think the government should have dealt with this sooner rather than later. I was actually surprised when Mr. Kaplan submitted his report in May that we didn't get a response until September. The report is very clear on what it has to say, and I was waiting for it to drop then. So I think there is a good reason perhaps to say we've been slow. But again, in my world, late is better than never.
Can I just add to that? I don't disagree
I'm
at all.
sorry, I have to interrupt, Mr. Lee. I'm afraid that is Mrs. Block's time, but perhaps you can get a response in on the next intervention. Okay. We'll go to Mr. Gasparo, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you both very much for your very detailed presentation. And if there was a window that was open on a higher floor, I could jump out of it. It was, pretty stark. Geez. Yeah, exactly. Mr. Ryder, there have been some, I think you made some comments about Denmark, about how the Denmark Postal Service has been the canary in the coal mine. And Denmark's postal service is ending letter delivery after a 90% decline in mail volume and strong national digitization strategy. Can you possibly speak to the key factors that made this possible in Denmark, such as digital infrastructure, government public policy, cultural readiness more broadly?
I have to give you a two-part answer. To that. First, although they say the post office is discontinuing letter mail, they have another organization there called DOC, which delivers newspapers and magazines. And as of January 1st, 2026, they're going to pick up the letter mail. Also, it costs $6 a letter in Denmark to mail a letter. It's $1.44 in Canada. But the other key thing here, Ian, bless his heart, has been saying for some years that we should be getting rid of letter mail altogether. We're not in a position yet in Canada because of digitization. We haven't digitized. What do I mean by that? You get a digital passport. I still have a physical one. I used it today. How about a digital credit card? Well, I still get a physical credit card. I still get a physical driver's license. I still get a physical health card. Now, Denmark digitized many of those things. Therefore, they were not using the mail to send them. But when we had the strike back in November, December, there were all kinds of, talking about worried Canadians. Where am I going to get my passport to take my trip? What am I going to do? Until you digitize those, I think we're still going to need the letter mail. But to Ian's point, and he's absolutely right, I call it the canary in the coal mine, I look out 10 years from now, and assuming digitization solves those things and makes it go away, and by the way, neither of us have mentioned AI. God knows what AI is going to do. I think 10 years from now, yeah, letter mail could be dead here in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to add something, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I don't want to leave anyone with the idea that the process of digitization is over. We are in the middle of it, or perhaps 2/3 of the road. We can quibble over, we know whether it's 2/3 of the road. In the next 10 years, I do believe we know there's discussions in many countries, including Canada, about digital passports. Yes, digital driver's licenses, digital health cards. So that's coming. We know that that is coming. And so my point being that we won't be dealing with I didn't say we should end letter mail. I said we should be planning on its very imminent demise. So we don't have to worry about that. We should really be focusing what Marvin said. How are they going to get back into the game in parcels? Because that is their core business, parcels and letters. And if they don't get back into parcels, then their future is very bleak, because I don't believe they have a snowball's chance in hell, pardon my language, of getting into banking, because we have one of the most dynamic and brutally competitive bank systems in the world, which is why the French banks didn't come in, and the German or the Swiss or the American or the British, because they know that they wouldn't make it here.
I guess
Règlement, Monsieur le Président, parfois,
Madame?
les interprètes sont incroyables.
Sorry, the interpreters are incredible, but the sound isn't coming through every time with Mr. Lee. It's cutting in and out a bit, and perhaps he could speak a bit more slowly.
Yeah, I think that's probably for all of us in the room, just to slow down a tiny bit our cadence on our speech. We'll go back to Mr. Gasparo. You have a minute.
So you touched on parcels. So maybe I'll be really quick. If you guys can just please provide what strategies would you recommend to help Canada Post regain some market share in parcels and compete more effectively with the private sector?
Canada Post has two competitive advantages in that area. Canada Post has two competitive advantages in that area. One is they serve every community in Canada, every mailbox in Canada. The private people don't, so that's one advantage. And the second, their prices. We haven't talked necessarily about a big jump in postal rates. Most small business people were very reluctant to move to the other delivery people because they get a much better deal from Canada Post. Why they did leave, however, was they weren't certain the parcel would get there. And until we get some harmony back in the marketplace so that it's not a Russian roulette, then I think those people are staying away.
And I'll just add to that, I agree with what Marvin said completely.
I'm sorry, Mr. Lee, we're out of time for,
Okay.
but perhaps the next intervention. We'll go to Ms. Gaudreau, please.
Moi, d'entrée de jeu, je dois vous dire,
First of all, I'd like to say, Mr. Chairman, that if I speak very quickly in French like that, they'll have trouble, the interpreters, but I have the impression that if myself, speaking my own language, I don't have enough time. And I know that I have missed several components, and I don't want these gentlemen to repeat. It seems all very relevant, but I want to point that out. I feel discriminated against. I'm going to say it. What I understood from your opening comments was that a potential privatization would be necessary to achieve some kind level of profitability or break-even. But we're talking about urban areas yes, I heard that we talked a bit about the Magdalen Islands and things like that. But competition doesn't want to know anything about servicing those rural areas. And it could be even in Mont-Laurier in my riding. So we're 41 million people. Currently, there are 17 million addresses. And I'm trying to see, do we want to experience what other countries did in the privatization of an essential service? And I'd like to hear you on that point.
Apologies. I'm not getting any translations, so I didn't really understand what you said.
Same here. I didn't get any translation either. Sorry.
Testing on the English channel. 1, 2, testing.
Or was it not?
It was
I
earlier.
assume.
It's not.
We'll pause for a moment, and I'll get the IT to check both. We'll suspend. back. We'll start at the very beginning for you, Madame Gaudreau. Thank you very much.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le
Thank you
Président.
very much, Mr. Chairman. So I'm wondering, can you hear me? It's fine. I want to focus on this because I want to listen to the tape later. I'm wondering if we wish that Canada Post be a service for all Canadians and Quebecers, we're 41 million. When I hear, I'm sorry?
Ce n'est peut-être pas là, mais je suis désolée.
I'm sorry. You don't understand, perhaps. I'm wondering about privatization. I'm a businesswoman, and so obviously there are costs, there's profitability, you move on or you don't. When you look at other countries that privatized, unless there are some that I'm not aware of, but it didn't work with the ultimate goal of offering the service to all. How could we attack this with saying either break even, but offer this service to all 17 million addresses coast to coast to coast here in Canada?
Me or Ian? Either one. So let me just say quickly, I'm not advocating privatization. I don't necessarily think we're at that stage in the game to consider it. Certainly, I am advocating that Canada Post take on the private delivery people and try to gain back the market share. I also think they should be looking at other kinds of partnerships that they can bring value to as it goes forward. But ladies and gentlemen, you do have an alternative strategy here. Again, quick math, if you've got 17 million households and each household paid a $100 a year Canada Post tax, you'd have $1.7 billion. Now, I've witnessed from afar how people reacted to carbon taxes. I have a feeling Canada Post taxes wouldn't be loved any better, but that is an alternative. And in the United States, they have done that to some extent, dipped into their own treasury to fund the U.S. Postal Service. I would like to encourage management to do it on their own, give them the best chance before I say we should dip into our pockets and pay.
Monsieur Lee?
Mr. Lee?
You're muted, Mr. Lee.
I'll just go a little bit differently. I think that in Canada, we have already de facto, not de jure, privatized much of the post office in the biggest cities, the Calgarys, the Montreals, the Toronto, the GTAs, et cetera. Because if you look at the stats and break it down, the private couriers, national, regional, and local private couriers have taken over a very large chunk of the business in the bigger cities in Canada, but they haven't in the rural and remote communities. And so I think we've got to really look at the future of Canada Post, that there's two completely different scenarios. In the cities, I know all kinds of people that just don't use the post office. I'm talking business, I'm talking individuals, and yet you go to the rural, I grew up on a farm in rural Eastern Ontario, in Lanark County. And you go to these small towns and communities, and I'm sure the same as in rural Quebec, they're very, very dependent. So I think we have to come up with two different solutions, one for the rural and remote, because their needs are completely different, where there's no alternatives. And in the urban cities across Canada, many Canadians have abandoned the post office, which is why there's not this huge blowback that we saw in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s with the postal strike.
Ben, j'apprécie ce que j'entends,
I
Monsieur.
appreciate what I'm hearing, Mr. Lee, because, in fact, not only you have probably access at broadband, internet, and you also have everything you need. And you're very intelligent. And I think about people who are different, who maybe have disabilities, or whether they're intellectual or physical. And for me, it's as if we're abandoning them if we don't demonstrate that the service will be provided, not just to the place, but in a way that the individual is able to receive it. So we're talking distance, but there's a high percentage of people who are illiterate, and people don't all have a cell phone. So there are black holes that have no service a few kilometers from here when I just head home to my riding. And so technology, we have to be very careful with, and we're fearful of artificial intelligence, because you can understand, gentlemen, that laws and legislation doesn't move as fast as technology does. So my time is up, but I thank you very much, because that gave me a good idea. Thank you.
So, Mr. Patzer, please. We'll do our 5-minute rounds.
Thank you very much. I guess maybe I'll chuck this out there to both of you, but Purelator, for example, which is actually owned by Canada Post, at least to the tune of 91%, first half of 2025 turned a $101 million profit. Do either of you know what their market share is of parcel delivery in Canada? And why is that not a model that Canada Post is looking to use when it's their own when they actually own that very company?
I don't know. Ian, do you know what the market share is?
I don't have the market share for the courier companies, but I do want to point out, because I did look at them. If you look at their head count, they're not, forget 65,000, forget 25,000. Now, I'm not trying to justify what, as you know, what I've advocated on that side, but all the major courier companies in this country are in the 5 to 7 to 10 to 12,000 head count. And Canada Post, I just looked it up in their annual report, 75% of their cost structure is wages. And so when people say we're going to downsize Canada Post, but we're not going to get rid of people, well, it's not possible. The arithmetic doesn't work.
Back to your point about Purelator, remember, it is like the other courier companies. So it's only really serves urban and suburban markets. It's able to cherry pick. They also charge a higher cost. It's $1.44 to mail a letter in Canada. It's not $1.44 to ship something by Purelator. So that business has taken that high end of the market, and it competes very successfully against the other courier companies. Canada Post offers a different kind of a service.
That's right. That's right.
And so, Mr. Lee, with your 2015 report, I have, I mean, I didn't read it line for line, but I definitely flipped through it and read a good chunk of it. Let's just say that the government at that time had implemented your report. What standing would Canada Post have today, and what would it look like today?
Thank you for that question. It would not be hemorrhaging the cash that it's hemorrhaging now. In fact, I don't believe it would be losing money. But remember, I did advocate pretty radical surgery. I said franchise all the post offices. I agree with Marvin what he said. They give great service. I've been going to a Shoppers Drug Mart franchise for a long time. So to your question, the 400 million from the door to door to the 25% of Canadians, that would 10 years at 400 or 500 million, and Deloitte estimated at the time it was 500 million. Well, there's $5 billion. That's the accumulated loss of the last 8 years. Just that saving alone. And if they had ended 5 day a week, the universal service delivery 5 days a week to the 17 million addresses, the savings there, yes, reduction in headcount would have been massive. And then you franchise the post offices. I mean, you're talking in the billions. This will not bring back, I want to get this out for everybody. This will not bring back letter mail. It will not. We're not going back to the writing letters to our dear old grandmama. Those days are gone. The old analog economy is gone. We're deep into the digital economy. But it would have given Canada Post a lot of degrees of freedom and a lot more money to reinvest into parcels to recover their game. If they had done this 10 years ago, they could have saved literally billions on those costs that they absorbed needlessly.
So the minister was here and basically was trying to say that it was only just recently that the struggles really happened. You're indicating, I mean, obviously as far back as 2015 that it needed drastic measures. You had the foresight to know that. Why didn't the government? When they had 10 years and didn't do anything.
I'm guessing it was because it's such a political hot potato, and this came out in my thesis. I mean, and I want to be very careful and very delicate, but CUPW has a reputation of being the most militant union in the federal public service. And if anybody wants to challenge me on that, I can point you to pages. And I ended up 1/3 of my thesis was on all of the strikes in Canada Post. They were even involved, well, they weren't called CUPW, but they were involved in the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike, postal workers. And I'm not criticizing them. I'm not condemning them. I'm just simply saying that it's much more militant than the other public sector unions in the government of Canada. And so it could be a reluctance to go down that road and engage in a long protracted strike.
So basically, the political will from the government for the last 10 years to act wasn't there, is basically what you're saying.
In essence.
Maybe offer something slightly different. In our world, the need for change often explains how people want to change. So 10 years ago, I don't think people looked at Canada Post as being on the precipice of what we now see today. Therefore, the need for change 10 years ago, it would have been a much harder sell. It would have been a much easier sell 5 years ago, but we were tied up with the pandemic. So you're on the right track. These are changes that should have been done before, but if you could have convinced people 10 years ago, you're a better person than I am.
Just to put some facts on the table.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt.
I was just going to say that I think election, but I digress.
Thanks. We'll go to Ms. Rochefort, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you for that discussion and that additional comment there, Mr. Ryder. For me personally, I think back 10 years, and I think when we were bringing in some of the post office boxes in my community and the outrage that people had to switch from home delivery to post office boxes, I simply could not see the changes that are being proposed now, being proposed 10 years ago. But I guess in the Kaplan report, he recommended a series of changes to address the need for flexibility. And I think Canada Post had discussed hiring part-time staff, and there was different options that were brought forward. But why was the union critical of that? And why have they been resistant to, I mean, in this day and age, they see the competitors, especially with parcel delivery. Why are they so against operational flexibility?
So if you don't mind,
my own interpretation.
Let Ian go.
My own interpretation is that because Canada Post and the workers have been under the, let's call it the letter mail monopoly model for so long, 2 centuries. I mean, literally going back to the origins of the post office. And it was the letter mail monopoly model. They had a monopoly and they didn't have to compete, and nobody expected them to compete. We didn't ask them to compete. So that's part of their culture. That's part of their corporate culture, their value system. And then because of this transformation into the parcels, where it is not a monopoly model, it's a brutally, viciously competitive model. And I think that the transition is very, very difficult to switch from a monopoly model mentality into a much more competitive mentality. And the second reason is, understandably, I'm unionized at my university. Unions do not want to give up past benefits that have been negotiated at the bargaining table, and CUPW has been very clear about that, and I certainly understand that.
So what I was going to tell you is that there are 2 kinds of flexibility. One would be to bring in these part-time workers who only work on the weekends. The other would be to say to workers, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep you employed, but your weekend might be Tuesday, Wednesday, rather than Saturday, Sunday. And there are lots of people who work in hospitality who understand that. You don't get always Saturday, Sunday off. Yeah. But as Ian just pointed out, the union would have to go back to the workers and say, we're giving something up. We're going to change something here. Maybe we're even in agreement with some of you moving to early retirement. And this is a union that's not used to backing down. They're this fast and forward. So when you ask them to kind of go backwards and give up some things that you've had, very difficult for them to do that.
Yes.
But thank you for your comments. That's good.
Thanks. We'll finish up with Ms. Goudreau, please. Go ahead.
I have one simple question. What is the recommendation, the main one, that you would make to us to ensure that the CEO of Canada Post will be able to deliver a report that is worthy of the respect of what Canada Post is, but not be in such a deficit position.
I'll take a first shot at that if I can. As I said in my remarks, the 3 changes that have been proposed are necessary but not sufficient. He has another 20 days to come back and tell you how he's going to move people to community mailboxes and Mr. Bullrich, where they're going to be located. In my case, they're on municipal rights of way. They aren't rented spaces. They're on municipal rights of way. He's got 20 days to tell you how many people he's going to probably furlough or move to early retirement. He's got 20 days to talk about some of these rural post offices, but that's not still enough. I don't know if he can give you the second half of that, is how do you then grow this business so that you can get rid of that extra $1 billion. But you should hold him accountable to that. That is why you have a CEO of the organization. And I think if he can get the last piece, which is this flexibility around the workforce, it is possible, I think, to win back some of this market share. But I've got to warn you, I don't know if it'll be enough. And again, frankly, you'll have to think about this. If he could reduce the deficit from $1.5 billion to just $500 million, and he says, look, I've done everything I can, but that's as low as I can get it, is this group prepared to say, well, maybe we should think about subsidizing it again? I don't know. But he hasn't had the ability to have a free hand to tackle that. So let's give him that chance, see what he comes back with.
Merci, Monsieur Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
He can give you 3 fast answers. Number 1, 5-day-a-week delivery has got to go. It's just not sustainable at all, going out to 17.5 million addresses, 52 weeks a year. Not possible. Number 2, franchise all the post offices that are corporate owned. And number 3, go to dynamic route scheduling so that they can reschedule to get that flexibility that they desperately need. Those 3 recommendations were in my report for 2024.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Lee, Mr. Ryder, thank you very much. It was very informative and very interesting and a bit funner than I thought it would be. Colleagues, thanks very much. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you Tuesday morning. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you.